Well, that's what I was thinking. Oh, where am I? All right.
Whenever I introduce myself, I say no relation. So, and then but either way.
I think you should say that. I think that's delightful, personally. But, here we go. It's almost ready to talk. All right. Hey, everyone, and welcome to Chef AJ Live. I'm your host, Chef AJ, and this is where I introduce you to amazing people like you who are doing great things in the world that I think you should know about. As more often than not happens with this show, one guest is referred by another guest. And today's guest is Dr. Kofi Essel. I can't wait to hear and learn all about him. Please welcome him to the show. It's very nice to meet you. And I think you take the prize for the most beautiful background I've seen.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
I thought it was virtual.
You before. It's
so
not virtual. I was telling you before, my wife's not a big fan. She doesn't like how I've organized it, but I think it's growing on me and maybe growing on her as well. So
honestly, it was so perfect. I thought, wow, the virtual backgrounds are really getting good. Then you told me it's real. I'm like, come to my house. It's beautiful.
I don't have that kind of skill.
Well, I can't wait to hear more about you because you were referred by Dr. Marcia Gales, and she has referred so many wonderful guests to the show. So tell us all about what you do in the field of lifestyle medicine.
Yeah, so I'm happy to be here, tell a little bit about my story and sort of how I got to where I am today. I'm a big fan of the nutrition world. I think I grew up really having a passion for nutrition. My family's from Ghana, West Africa. We grew up in Little Rock, Arkansas. I've actually been plant-based for, it depends who you ask, but at least the last 5 to 8 years. And so we grew up in Little Rock, Arkansas, families from Ghana, and we grew up eating a ton of rice and stews and grains. And, you know, meat was always something that was on the side for us. It was always like a garnish. It was always something that, you know, we didn't have a ton of. And maybe resources wise, that was the reason. But in general, that was sort of our experience growing up. And it wasn't until, and actually, it's funny, I played a ton of sports growing up as well, and basketball in particular. And my mom was always telling me about the role that food and nutrition would play in my health. If you eat this food, you can see further. If you do this, you will be able to achieve this goal. And that was really something that was motivating to me. And it would really change the foods I was eating throughout. I got to college, and college was an interesting experience for me because I walked onto the basketball team when I got there. And I remember getting into the school in Atlanta. I went to Emory University in Atlanta, and they had, people talk about their meal plans are really bad, but I felt like we had a phenomenal meal plan. I walked into this cafeteria and I saw all of this food, and they said, you can have as much as you want. You can have anything you want. And I took advantage of that. I would go to practice and be so tired. I'd come home and eat all the food and then pass out. And I couldn't figure out how to stay awake and study and be really great in my academics because I thought I was doing the right thing. You know, I was tired, so I would have some Skittles or some caffeine or whatever it may be. And I couldn't figure out what was going on. I remember joining a peer counseling group to teach other students about activities. So we had drug peer counseling or food peer counseling. And I decided to do the food and nutrition one. And I learned a lot about, they asked us, what did we want to learn about? And I remember asking, can we learn about the idea of power eating? What do we do to eat, to have energy, to be strong and be able to focus? And I learned the science of power eating at the time. And it really hooked me at that time. So I remember taking that forward, teaching my classmates, really loving the topic of nutrition, but I knew I wanted to be a doctor. And I knew doctors, they don't do nutrition. That's not a thing. So I remember going into medical school. And I went to school in Washington, D.C. at George Washington University. I remember going there, and during the first semester, they were asking, hey, what do you want to do over your first summer? I was like, I don't know. I played sports, maybe sports medicine or orthopedics, maybe some kind of research topic on that. And I was like, but I have this interest in nutrition, but I know doctors don't do that work, right? And I talked to the person, they were like, I don't know. I said, I don't know either. Let's look it up. So we Googled it and came across a fellowship opportunity through the American Society for Nutrition, a clinical nutrition fellowship sort of program. And I got to work with one of 60 different mentors around the country who do medicine and who combine nutrition into their medicine. And I ended up working with a guy out of Connecticut by the name of Dr. David Katz. And I spent a whole summer with Dr. Katz, and it was a phenomenal summer. I got to travel with him. I learned about the work he was doing in the community spaces. I learned how he incorporates research. And I went to his house and I learned how he loves his family and how he cherishes his family and his wife and his kids and sets good boundaries and all these things. And I was like, this is powerful to see how he's been able to incorporate nutrition into the work he does. And so that was sort of a huge spark for me. So I took that spark and moved forward. And I think two other things that really sort of drew me into this world of lifestyle medicine. And one of them was around my first or second year of medical school. I remember seeing an email that came out. The whole school got it. They said, hey, there's a local conference in Washington, D.C. called the Nutrition and Clinical Practice Conference. This was a conference that was led by a group called PCRM. I had no idea who they were. I saw two things in the email, and I joke about this, but I saw the word nutrition and practice, and then I saw the word free. So I said, hey, this is something for me. This is a good place I need to go. So I went to this conference in DC, and I met all these amazing people. And I said, what is all this going around? It was tofu scramble that they gave us. What is tofu scramble? And it was very interesting. They were talking about all these things that I hadn't heard about. They were talking about the idea of reversing disease. I saw patients come to the front and they were talking about reversing diabetes, reversing hypertension. And I said, this is not what I'm hearing in my classroom. I'm hearing about maintaining, management, slowing down, but this is going to kill you no matter what, but you can slow it down. But the idea of reversing and preventing in this kind of way was brand new and was something that I thought was really outstanding to hear about. I remember sitting at a table with a guy, sorry, my long-winded story, but I remember sitting at a table with this guy and he was saying, hey, I was a vegetarian all my life or for however many years, and I had a heart attack. And I was like, a vegetarian having a heart, it doesn't align. He said, but I did it the wrong way. I was eating these foods I shouldn't have been eating. I wasn't eating whole foods. And it was really interesting to see that. And I heard all these stories come across. I was walking down the hallway, I see Dr. Barnard and I say, hey, Dr. Barnard, I have a question. My culture does a lot of rice, for example. And I know that eating too much rice is bad, right? That's not a good thing, right? Too many carbs and all that stuff you hear about in different places. And he was like, no, I want you to eat more rice. It's like, what? I can eat more rice. I can eat the foods that my culture has been eating. It's okay to do that. Liberation. I'm free. I can do it. It was mind blowing to me to hear these stories in this conference. So I thought that was great. And I will say I was caught off guard by it at first. And I said, this sounds too good to be true. But over the years, I slowly started adapting more and more plant-based to my culture, to what I was doing, to my foods I was eating. And I thought that was a really important thing for me. And the last thing I would say that really put me in this trajectory is sort of my experiences in med school as well. I had some phenomenal mentors, one by the name of Dr. Ruth Perot, Canary Gerardo, Dr. Ronique Shields. These are all local community stakeholders and physicians, pediatricians in the area. And they took me under their wing. And they really showed me how to have more of an asset-based model and mentality and approach to how I worked alongside my community partners. So instead of looking at it from a deficit mindset of like, oh, I need to come in and fix my patients or fix these situations, coming in with a mindset of recognizing where people start. They have gifts, they have talents, they have all of these things that we can start with and build from there. And I think that perspective really changed how I approached lifestyle medicine, how I approached approaching lifestyle medicine in a way that it's not just for people with great privilege or with people with great needs. It can be something that everybody can be able to access and do and live. And I think that was something, again, that really sort of started me on my way. From there, it was over. I did community cooking classes, I've been teaching, do research, and I've been all kinds of stuff in the space. And it's just been an exciting journey, and then I wouldn't change for the world.
Right. I love that. You mean I can eat all the rice I want? People still think that grains and beans are bad for them.
Yeah, I grew up with a 50-pound bag of rice in the house, just sitting right there. And people would come over and saying, what is that? That's sustenance. That's how we thrive in this household. And that's what I knew. I knew these foods. And the reality is they were cheap. They were sustainable. We didn't have to do a lot to prepare them, but it really allowed us to thrive in our home. When we didn't have great resources, it was something that really was great. Now, I will say, I grew up with my grandmother as well. And grandmother was home and she would help with cooking and all these things. And mom was working and doing a lot of things, trying to really, maintain the home. So having that grandmother be there and having sort of that multi-generational experience was really important for me. And it allowed me to learn cooking early on, really cooking alongside my grandmother and learning these tastes and these flavors, and the culture is so much better as well. So
do you actually cook?
I do cook. So it's funny. I love to cook. I started cooking very early on, as I mentioned, and I thought I was a good cook as a sort of a growing early adult, and I really wasn't, but I gained skills through the years. I've done a ton of work in really building my skills, working alongside different organizations and stakeholders and volunteering and all these things. And actually, right now, I direct a culinary medicine program at an institution. So it's really cool. So
tell me about it.
oh my gosh.
Because this is so exciting. Because I don't know, are you familiar with Dr. Edwin McDonald in Chicago, who does something like that? He's a GI doctor, plant-based.
I am. So an organization I used to work with called Common Threads. I remember he gave a talk with them. So I've heard some of his work. A dynamic physician, indeed, a GI doctor, I think. Yeah, right. So
because I've seen some of this, and maybe we could do a Zoom with you doing that, because that is so exciting to me. Culinary medicine.
It is exciting. As you probably know, and your audience knows, we in medicine have not done a great job with teaching the power of nutrition, the power of food as medicine in the clinical setting. We don't do a great job teaching in medical school, and you assume that as you move throughout your experience, you'll learn more about it, but you keep not learning about it. And then you kind of pick up stuff from wherever you learn it, whether it's a Dr. Oz show, or whether it's you read this magazine and you saw somebody do a keto or intermittent fast, whatever. You take these things on, you absorb them, and then you give them to your patients in a way that's not really digested well, not really communicated well. And it further stigmatizes our families. It pushes them further away. It helps them not feel connected to us. And I think to do this work well, we need to train doctors how to do it well. With culinary medicine, there's a really powerful group. There's a specialty certificate that's been started called CCMS. It's a certified culinary medicine specialist. It started over a few years ago, and you can get 60 hours of elective time, and doc MDs, physician assistants, RDs, NPs, all can sort of access this skill set. What's the skill set? The skill set is about learning the power of food and nutrition for health purposes, in addition to really using budget-friendly approaches and recognizing the skills or culinary efficacy, how all these things can really, if you empower your patients with them as well, it can improve their health. But also, if you use those skills for your own health, imagine the lifestyle change that then can sort of come out of you into them, if it's not just something you talk about, but something you also experience in your own world. So that's something we do at my institution. It's a powerful thing. Students are really passionate about it. People come in with interest in this area already, but then there's a lot of people who just want to learn about it. Because once you learn the power of nutrition in transforming health, then you can learn the importance of how to communicate that, how to use food as medicine, and how to do some of these really powerful things. So I've been very passionate about it for years, and it's something I just took on. I just took on this role in the last few months, but really have a powerful team around me, and really excited to sort of allow it to continue to blossom.
That is so cool. You're a pediatrician, right?
I am. So I'm a community pediatrician in Washington, D.C., but I also, I'm an academic as well. So I teach as well and do research. I see patients a few days a week, and then research and teaching.
So what's it like working with kids and because that would be the ideal time to change their diet if it's not healthy, rather than, when they're 80 and 90 and kind of set in their ways.
Yeah, honestly, that's one of the reasons I went into pediatrics, is the role of behavioral change, the role of families recognizing that they would do things differently for the health of their child. And I thought that was powerful to see that, hey, I would communicate to some of the adults, and, it's motivational interviewing, all these techniques, and some of them would be stuck in their ways. I'm not changing what I'm doing. But rather in the pediatric setting, again, we get to work alongside each other. We're building relationship. We build relationship over a long period of time. In the first 5 years, we see families 15 to 20 times, right? The first 5 years of life. So we have so many opportunities to build relationships and trust. For me to come in here and say all these things without building trust is something that it doesn't really work well. So I will say that it's a unique opportunity that I'm given and blessed with, and I take full advantage of it. A group I work with is called Partnership for a Healthier America, PHA, and they have this Veggies Early and Often campaign. Phenomenal campaign. Why is it phenomenal?
Name, Veggies
Early and Often.
That is a fantastic name.
It's fantastic because the thing is, we recognize in general that children don't really consume a ton of vegetables. And if we were to transform that early on, we can transform the trajectory of their lives. So one of the big promotions that we have been focusing on, that I promote in my system as well, is recognizing, in particular, the palate and the transformation of the palate. So some would argue that in the womb, the fetus is tasting or being able to taste the flavors of the food 26, 27 weeks. If a mother chooses to breastfeed, the fetus is able, or the baby is able to taste flavors of food early on. So you're already starting to transform the palate early on. And then also when you start solid foods, unfortunately or fortunately, I would say unfortunately, most families introduce solid foods way too early on, and there's harms with that. But there's some strategies that we've been really encouraging and promoting. One of them is this interesting strategy called flavor training. Flavor training is really powerful because in the first 4 to 7 months, so around month 4 to month 7, if the child is developmentally ready, you can start introducing flavors, not whole foods, but giving different flavors, especially flavors that have been hard to introduce later on. Umami, sour, bitter, blending them, pureeing them, giving them taste. And children are really open to them, or infants are really open to them at this time. Just small flavored tastes of it, right? The tip of your finger, giving it at the tip of a spoon. And they start to eat these and, maybe they show you a face initially, but what we know is that the palate is incredibly malleable. And we know that, right? And so even for a child, they're malleable. What I try to fight and encourage my families to do is to say, if you do introduce some of these flavors, the flavor of broccoli, right? And you give it early now, right? The child turns their head or, shows that they may not be as interested. Don't close the door. Recognize that it can take up to 10 to 15 times of trying it before the child may love it. So even though you may not love it, that has nothing to do with the child loving it or not. You can still create an adventurous palate. One of the docs I work closely with is Dr. Namali from Fernando. Her name is she goes by Dr. Yum out of Virginia, and she has some phenomenal tools that she's created and really worked with. But some of her really cool stuff is really focused on this as well. But needless to say, that flavor training in the first 4 to 7 months, giving small flavors, and then once you do start solid foods around 6 months, taking full advantage of that, expanding the palate. One of the things we used to say is, every time you introduce a food, wait about 3 to 7 days to introduce a new food. Why? To make sure a child's not allergic to that food. But what we've seen is that there's typically about 9 foods that cause more than 90% of allergies in children. So as long as they're not those 9 foods, keep introducing the foods. Introduce multiple flavors, because this is a magic window of time that you can create a palate of adventure for the future. So it's a great opportunity. I take full advantage of it. I tell them to introduce these fruits and vegetables early on, especially the vegetables. You never have to get a child to love sugar or salt, right? They will always love that. That's not something I have to worry about. But these other flavors are important. Even water. I don't start water at 4 to 6, usually water around 6 months. But the flavor of water is so important for children. So giving them not too much, because we don't want to make them have seizures. We don't want to take away space for them to eat. But having 4 max up to 8 ounces of water throughout the day is a phenomenal thing for them to enjoy the taste, and stay away from those juices, right? Because all that sugar transforms the palate, creates these picky eaters, and really dedicates a child to sugar for the rest of their lives. And it's something that I always try to focus on as well.
I think that's just so brilliant, that whole title for that campaign, and I'm posting the link to it. And if you know somebody named Dr. Yum, they have to be on the show. I just love that name. And I had Dr. Nicole Avina on once, and she said the same thing. You don't really have to teach a kid to like fruit, but you've got to start introducing those veggies. And I'm embarrassed to say, I don't know if you know my story, I didn't eat vegetables till I was 43. And that's, because I wasn't breastfed. So what's formula? It's oil, sugar, and salt, right? And my mom didn't really feed me that as healthy as I think she could have. It wasn't her fault necessarily, but I didn't develop the preference for it. And I had to teach myself in my 40s to just, even though I didn't like it, I just kept eating the kale, and, now I love it.
Yep. It's a hurdle, right? Like it's a hurdle to, one of the ways I actually learned this, I remember I was at Dr. Katz's lab in Connecticut. I remember there was a girl, she was South Korean, and she had this loose leaf green tea. And she was like, hey, if you want some of this, bring a cup tomorrow and you can have some. I was like, oh my gosh, I would love some. So I went to the store in Connecticut. I got a cup, a mug, and of course, what did I get for the green tea? Honey, a big thing of honey. So I come next day to work, and my internship, and I'm like, I'm ready for my loose leaf green tea. And I show her the honey. She's like, we don't use honey. I was like, what do you mean? How am I going to sweeten it? I need that flavor, don't I? And she's like, nope, you're not going to do that. So I was like, okay, fine. Let me just drink it. Over the course of a week or two, I started to really enjoy the flavor of the tea. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is a flavor that I now appreciate. And I don't need it to be adulterated by the flavor of this, the super saturation of sugar. And I think it's hard to, with kids especially, like if it's there, they're going to drink it. If it's there, they're going to drink it. So one of the biggest things for families is I encourage them, try to see if you can reduce it significantly, or just take it out the house. Because if you see it, you're going to want to have it too, right? So I think it's one of those things that if they recognize that, if they can get over that hurdle of trying things a few times and get over this may not taste as good, they may see the benefits of it, 10, 15 times down the line.
Right. Are you finding that since you started practice that the rates of childhood obesity and diseases like diabetes are increasing?
100%. It hasn't increased 100%, but yes, I am seeing that. Let me be clear. So I actually have an interesting story. One of my colleagues, she sent me an email. She was in tears. She was saying, I don't know what to do, especially during COVID. One of my patients, she saw that week had gained 90 pounds in the course of that year. Another patient had gained 60 pounds and is eating more fruits and vegetables and drinking more water enough. Like, this can't be enough. Like, look at what's happening. Look at what we're seeing in our populations that are more marginalized. This is unreal. And I think it's stressful. I think it's something that we definitely see in our clinical space. I recognize the weight and the challenge of the topic of obesity, but at the same time, I look at obesity as a complex, chronic, multi-system disease for the most part. And as a result, we need to approach it with a way that's a multidisciplinary approach. And so it's something that I see a ton, and it's actually something that we do a lot of work, me and my research team in particular, in trying to get clinicians to be able to address more effectively. And not only obesity or weight, but diet-related chronic diseases. I think you have to be very careful with young children in hyper-focusing on weight. I think it's something we should not do, in fact, because it further stigmatizes them. They're getting that at home, they're getting that at school. They feel that they can't eat at school because people are making fun of them. Our clinical space has to be a safe space for them. And we cannot create an environment that's toxic for them. And some of the ways that we've done in the past have been rather toxic. One of my patients came to me and said, hey, they went to some multidisciplinary center and they told him that he's going to die if he doesn't. He was 12 or 13, so he's going to die if he doesn't change. And they were like, the parents were like, we're never going back there again. So if we don't create a relationship or build trust or create communication that we can continue sort of walking alongside of our families and making these phenomenal changes that they're making, even if we don't see change in weight right away, but seeing changes in behavior, changes in other measures. There's so many other measures we can look at without just looking at weight by itself. We're missing out on something. So we as clinicians have to think more broadly about it. But in general, to answer your question, yes, so we're seeing a lot more of it. We're having to refer more people to our subspecialist teams. But I'm also trying to make sure that we are becoming more and more empowered to be able to address it medically on the back end, but also at the front end. How do we prevent? How do we do more of this work in prevention of these diet-related chronic diseases?
It's got to be tough. I remember having a pediatrician on one saying like the kid was so heavy he couldn't even get up on the table, and it's got to be so hard, like you say, to broach that subject. But it's heartbreaking for the kid because I was the fat kid growing up, and I mean it's not any easier being the fat kid today,
Yeah, children with obesity, it's something that they definitely feel a lot of stress and stigma around. When I think about the topic of stigma, especially in this context, I typically think about it in sort of a trajectory in a way, like sort of thinking about like a continuum. Like there's obesity bias, there's obesity stigma, and then there's weight discrimination. And just sort of to walk through them, obesity bias, when we think about it, thinking about the idea of implicit or explicit, right? So implicit, sort of subconscious, unconscious bias that we extend towards individuals, and then explicit, right? Being very aware of these attitudes and beliefs that we have towards our patients. So a patient with obesity, they're lazy, right? The idea of having the attitude of them being lazy, that's a bias. Stigma transitions to really that sort of social stereotype we add on. So a patient with obesity is lazy, and therefore as a clinician, they're going to be non-compliant. So what's the point of me even sharing this information? They're not going to listen to me anyway. Look at that, right? That's the laziness, the stigma that goes along with it. And then lastly, the weight discrimination. The idea of, hey, individual with obesity, you're lazy. You're not going to follow what I tell you. So in fact, I'm not going to give you the same level of care as I give my other patients. And in fact, this is internalized. Patients internalize this, they feel it, it's palpable, and it makes them, it worsens depression, worsens weight gain, worsens anxiety. And it's something that, although we may think that it may be helpful, in fact, it's quite harmful. I've done some really interesting exercises with a bunch of my students in looking at weight stigma. So we do an implicit test on stigma, and I ask them the question to reflect on their experiences towards individuals with obesity. And I get typically one of four responses. One being, that test is wrong. This test that says I have bias, it must be wrong. I couldn't have bias. Why would I have bias? Number two, I get, well, I might have bias implicitly, but it doesn't affect how I care for people. There's no way I hinder it and I put it in that box. It doesn't affect how I care for people. And then the other two categories are interesting. One category is, yeah, I have bias, and it's important that I have it because people with obesity, they're going to die. And it's, if I don't tell them, if I don't be harsh on them, everybody else is not being real with them. If I don't tell them, who's going to tell them? The last category is rugged individualism. I've lost a significant amount of weight myself, so therefore everybody can do it. So if you just did what I did, everything would be fine. And I think those are typically the categories that I see that they all can be quite harmful. And I think it's important to take it from a stance and recognizing, meeting our families where they are, and seeing what they're ready for, right? Like every family's not ready for that ultimate change, but we can again go on this journey and not close the door, because once we start closing the door on them, then the conversation's over. There's no longer an opportunity to move our families towards, in this case, eating more plant-centric foods, eating more plant-centric approaches to lives, approaching lifestyle, understanding stress, and these other things as well. Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to just say eating more plants, and I'm never going to forget that, early and often. Jerry, who's watching live, says, Dr. Essel is so insightful. I love his compassion for others. And I noticed your language because I got chewed out. I host something called the Truth About Weight Loss Summit, and I had an obesity specialist, an adult obesity specialist. And I said, obese patients. And he actually got mad at me. I noticed you said patients with obesity. Very different.
Good catch. So yeah, I'm really big on centered language, or person first language. So I think that when we use the term obese to describe our patients, we're adding all the labels and the associations that society has put on patients with obesity: laziness, non-compliant, smelly, all this other stuff that goes along with it that shouldn't be there. And so I try to recognize the person first before I connect to the disease of obesity. It's subtle. I actually teach all of my students that. Every year I'm teaching them, and it's hard, like for us as clinicians to do that. It's really hard. But again, we, like everything in medicine, oftentimes it tells us to hyper focus on weight a lot of times. So it's like, well, if you have this, you're in this category. If you're thin, then no longer are you in this unhealthy category. When the reality is, as you know, your weight doesn't necessarily describe your health, right? Like it's one factor, potentially. BMI is but one of the criteria we can use to define health. But if all we're looking at is, this is the only time I'm going to encourage exercise, this is the only time I'm going to encourage stress reduction, this is the only time I'm going to look at the foods you eat, we're missing out on a wonderful opportunity. But I will say, as clinicians, we don't have a ton of time. So it's important to be very strategic with how we use that time as well.
What I'm wondering, have you ever encountered this? Because I heard about this once from actually a plant-based pediatrician, that certain cultures feel that if their kids aren't big, they're not healthy.
Yeah, so that's so coming from an international experience myself. I studied anthropology in college, human biology and anthropology. I've family and friends from all over the world, and the reality is that is a true thing. Yes, weight has a lot to do with other factors outside of purely looking at through a health lens. And health, for some families, for some cultures, is more than, the foods you eat, right? The way you look can describe health as well. And having more girth, having more weight is a sign that you are not starving. You are not, quote unquote, hungry. You are doing quite well for yourselves. I remember going to one country and doing some medical work when I was in medical school. And we were doing some great work there, and we kept being offered some high quality food for them. It was like lamb and chicken and bread. And I was like, is there any beans? Are there any of these? There was a description of this food is for the poor people. And I was like, oh, that idea is really interesting. And it's probably morphed over the years, right? Like even when I think about my my culture growing up in Ghana, West Africa, like heavily plant centered. When you see a lot of westernization and you see a lot of sort of what's happened over the years, you're seeing a lot more sort of increase towards more processed foods and meats and all that stuff. And processed foods, part of it is, you know, lack of refrigeration and things like that. So there has been some benefit with that and being able to feed people. And I think that's important. But at the same time, it's important to recognize that cultures have really sort of thrived off of a lot of these fruits and vegetables and grains for generations. But with a lot of the modernization, it's like, we don't need to do that anymore. Now that we're doing better, we can incorporate more meat into the foods that we're eating. We can eat more like those Westerners, right? Incorporating more of that processed foods and all those things. When in fact, it's a trap, right? It's a trap, but it's because it looks so appealing. When you look on TV and you see America, the Westerners looking and thriving and singing and they have the media and they have all these things, that must be the goal. That must be what I need to achieve. And it creates, in a way, this idol that I have to achieve that, and by any means necessary. So I think it's interesting. But yes, that is something that I hear about, and it's something that I see in a lot of the patients and families I work with as well. Like if we're talking about food and families are starting to lose weight, they're like, I don't want to be too skinny. I don't, you know. So it's like, okay, but is there a way we can still focus on eating, you know, more quality, healthy food? But I don't want to look like that. Okay, so there's a lot here around body image and things that we have to talk about as well when we're discussing this. And I think it's an interesting discussion all the same, and why, again, it's so important that we meet our families where they are.
Yeah, that you know, you talk about processed food. 10 years ago, I wrote a book called Unprocessed, and my take was that even if you eat animal products, which I don't recommend, nobody should be eating processed food. And you know, you talk about the racial disparities, but the thing is the processed food is cheap, but so are beans and rice. But the beans and rice aren't addictive, and I find that is one of the biggest problems. Is that once they get that taste, they don't want to give it up.
Yeah, hyperpalatability of foods. I mean, we've seen this in the research and the literature. One of the interesting things is when you look at a topic like food security, and food security, for those who don't use that term or know that term, some would use the term hunger to describe food insecurity, but technically it's different. Food insecurity is when all members in a household don't have enough food to live an active and healthy lifestyle. When all members in a home don't have enough food to live an active and healthy lifestyle. And the thing about food security, it's sort of, in a way, it never travels by itself. It often travels with poverty or other things as well. And it ends up being a toxic stress, a stress that seems unrelenting, that doesn't relieve, right? Like it keeps going. Everybody goes through stressors, but when that stress doesn't turn off, that's something that can really reshape and reform the brain. It actually creates permanent changes in the brain. So it's interesting because when we look at individuals who are experiencing some of these hardships, such as food insecurity and other toxic stressors, we see it affects their palates. It can create this increased desire for hyperpalatable foods. It can create or take away the inhibition or the to eat foods, right? So you have less satiety when eating, create sort of binge eating behaviors. It creates difficulty in sort of how we choose the foods we do when we go to the grocery store. So these things, especially when populations that have been marginalized, that have been things like when structural racism hits and you have grocery stores leave and banks leave and all these things for things like redlining and all these things that have occurred, you wonder why communities are experiencing what they are. If you don't have a grocery store, if you don't have some of these things, I'm accessing what I can, right? And although when I have, how would I describe this? Certain marketing techniques, which seem very predatory, that focus on Black and Brown communities in particular, and you already have issues of marginalization in some of these communities. You add on these predatory marketing from the commercials and TV and all these things, and you take a vulnerable population and you just set them up for consumption of more of these processed foods, which are tasty, they're cost effective, and they're convenient. And oftentimes those are the three reasons we choose and gravitate towards the foods we gravitate towards.
That makes sense. Here's a question from Monarch who's watching live. Do your patients ever participate in the growing of the food?
Great question. So yeah, some of my families have gardens. I'm in an urban environment, so we see a lot of urban gardens where we are, and some phenomenal groups where we are doing some great work with urban gardens. Groups like DC Greens and Green Scheme, and just a lot of groups are around us doing some phenomenal work in the local area. So you see a lot of families taking advantage of that plot of land, because in urban communities, oftentimes there's not a lot of green space. So without a lot of the green space, it's hard to grow outside. Yes, you can grow your herbs and things inside. It's interesting. A lot of my patients use the program called the SNAP program, food stamp program. And a lot of people don't know you can actually purchase seeds with your SNAP dollars. So some of my families actually do that. They grow some of their own produce and they're able to reap the benefits of that. And then they share it with their neighbors, right? Community food security. So that's something that we see. I don't want to say a lot, but I do see it in some of my families for sure.
That's fantastic. I think that a lot of times if kids get involved in the growing and the cooking process, they're more excited about it and more apt to eat the vegetables early and often. I'll never forget that, early and often.
I think that's really great. One of the things I was doing before in our community cooking classes was bringing the kids in the kitchen with us. A lot of the cooking classes in the past has been focused on the adults, the parents, but what does it look like to have a family-centered approach? So we've done a way where we bring the whole family, especially the child around 6, 7, they can get the knife. There's some really cool knives. I'm sure you know about these knives that, won't cut you when you use them. So you can use these knives in the kitchen. Kids get in there, they're engaged. They're more likely to taste the foods. They're more likely to, and again, if you can get a taste or two in there, you're getting them closer and closer to consume that food and make that food part of their culture, part of their habit and their lifestyle. So it's definitely something that I see, that when you bring the kids in, when they're part of the growing, when they're part of the preparing of the foods, it's a cool thing to see. It's so, stressful sometimes for the parent to say like, well, how do I get this kid involved in this process? They're slowing me down. They're distracting us. We don't have much time. Time is a big issue for sure. But if we can teach you ways into doing this in a productive way, where you give the child certain things to do, not everything, but certain activities to do, in part of the cooking, make them feel a part of the experience. It plays a huge role in their consumption as well.
Yeah, I agree. I got an easy bake oven when I was 7 and I never stopped cooking. So you never know.
That was the seed.
Absolutely. Unfortunately, I wasn't cooking healthy things in the easy bake oven, little cakes, but still, I've always enjoyed the process. In your culinary medicine classes, are you the instructor? Are you doing the recipes actually?
So I haven't started teaching, just took on this role. I'll be starting my first course in December. But for my predecessors, those who've done this work before me and who I've been following for years, typically the doctor, we team up with a dietitian as well. We have a phenomenal dietitian at our site who's been doing some of this work for years, and they work directly with the students. We both cook together and are showing the students how to do this work. We also have worked with chef instructors that come in and help with the students as well. So it's kind of a shared effort across the board where we all take on different roles, but they're interchangeable as well. We all can kind of shift into different roles as well. One of the expertise and the skills that I bring is recognizing the role of thinking about the role in health and the role in sort of their journey and their trajectory as well. So I bring that as well, but also a passion for the kitchen. So that's some of the things that I'll be bringing.
That's cool. One of the things I hear a lot about people that are plant-based and want to have plant-based or vegan children is that they get pushback from their pediatrician how dairy is critical. And we know that's not true. So are you able to counsel your patients or, the parents of the patients saying, that maybe this isn't the ideal food for your child, cow's milk?
Ooh, tough topic. So for sure, I think there is this feeling that the child has to have milk, and milk is the way that they have to be able to consume their calories, especially after the age of 1. We know that a lot of families do consume milk, and I'm not one to go around and say everybody needs to get off of milk from my perspective, where I am as a clinician. But I do see that a lot of families will come to me and articulate, hey, do I have to drink this? And I will say to them, no, you do not. There are other ways of getting some of these nutrients. If you're looking for vitamin D, if you're looking for calcium, which, we talk about fortification, right? Talking about vitamin D, we talk about calcium. You're looking for fat, right? Making sure that you're getting these from other foods around. You don't have to get it from that. Typically, lactose intolerance ends up being an issue, especially a lot of Black and brown communities around the age of 4 or 5. You see a sort of a decrease in lactase enzyme that breaks down the lactose sugar. You see a changing in the microbiome that occurs as well. So usually that happens then, but you have other issues with milk as well in terms of the milk protein that bothers a lot of the children I see. And oftentimes that's something I do. So we can switch to if you want to do a plant milk, one of the ones that people often recommend is soy, but I can do any of them as long as you're incorporating the other foods in other ways, right? Like there's other ways of getting these nutrients. So I don't tell them they have to do it in this way, which unfortunately, that's probably the narrative and the script that a lot of doctors may use, that it has to look like this. But again, that goes back to our training. We didn't get a lot of this training. So it's like, yeah, this is what the head doctor told me, so I'm just going to keep passing it on. And I think there's a lot of freedom and latitude that we can do in sharing and helping our patients.
Are you familiar with Dr. Milton Mills? And he talks about how the dietary guidelines are racially biased and that milk shouldn't be recommended to people of color.
Yeah, so another tough topic for sure.
Sorry, I didn't mean to put you on the spot.
No, it's good. It's good. I'm familiar with his work as well. I think he's in the area where I am.
He's in DC. He works in DC.
I've never met him personally. Would love to one day. What I will say is that I think it's interesting. I think that milk is not the only way to achieve nutrients, but it can be quite disruptive to a lot of people's diets and a lot of people's health throughout the life course. And so to feel that this is something that you have to do, I think it's something that can be hazardous at times. You look at other guidelines around the world, Canadian guidelines, you look at the Harvard Healthy Plate, you look at all kinds of things, and you see water being that beverage on the side. Why can't I just have more water? And I think that's kind of how I promote it. I don't think my families need to be consuming this. That's not something you have to do. If you want to do it, so be it, but that's not something I promote that you have to do. So I think it is important to think of it that way. Is it inherently racist? I mean, I think that's definitely a school of thought for sure. And I can see how people would take that perspective on for sure.
Yeah. I'm curious, do you remember how much nutrition you learned in medical school and specifically what you learned?
Yeah, so nutrition was really baked into biochemistry. So we learned about, fats and carbohydrates and proteins in terms of pathways and chemical structures and these kind of things. The practical application was very limited. So typically the first 2 years in most medical schools are clinical or are preclinical, right? So you're in the classroom getting didactic lectures. Third and fourth year, you are on the wards, you're seeing patients. You would get a lecture here and there, but again, kind of very sparse and very sort of generic things that I think everybody kind of hears and knows about. The deeper learning did not come from medical school for me. The deeper learning came from a passion and interest, working with my mentors, getting out and doing some of my own research, working with researchers at my university and outside of university and learning those things. It didn't come from medical school. I think schools have done a better job. I've worked with a group, a national group focusing on figuring out ways in which we can incorporate more nutrition and focus on, obesity training, those kind of things, diet-related chronic disease training into medical schools throughout the trajectory, not only in medical school, but in residency programs and fellowship programs. Because as you get closer and closer to getting your hands on patients more full time, it's so important that you learn these skills, not only the knowledge of these nutritional facts and skills, because the reality is the more knowledge we get at times, it oftentimes feels like it separates us from our patients. It takes us away from the connectivity to our patients with knowledge gained by itself. It's not only the knowledge, but also the compassion and the methodology and how you communicate it needs to be sort of baked into your learning as well. So tools like motivational interviewing, where you, instead of always are focusing on sort of extrinsic motivators, I'm telling you this, so you should do that, but focusing on intrinsic motivators. What are your goals? What are your passions? Why do you want to change and achieve an improved health? Let's work from that perspective versus working from my perspective as a superior than you. And I'll throw a quote here. I often talk about, one of my mentors used to always say, never get confused with your future title. The title of MD that you will attain one day, never confuse that with medical deity. You are not a medical deity. You are not in control of anyone's life. You are here to walk alongside your families, to join them on this journey, especially as primary care doctor. Like that's a part of my opportunity, my experience I get. So I take full advantage of that. And I really cherish that opportunity to not force myself, but to build trust and again, to walk with them.
Great. I just want to read a very nice comment I see about you in the chat. He is amazing, a very eloquent speaker. I love the way he represents being healthy. So when I was little, the worst thing in the world going to the doctor was getting a shot. And the only way you could do it is because they gave you candy afterwards. And I'm wondering, in your office, do you just give them like a cucumber?
Sugar-free candy. No, I'm kidding. We don't give candy. No, we don't give candy. It's funny because it's interesting. So I don't give the shot personally. I tag my nursing team member. They go in and give the shot. So I gotta go, child. I have to go see another patient. But so there's a little bit of a separation there. But we incentivize with stickers. We celebrate with them. We congratulate them. We try to make them feel as good as we can. I mean, it's a shot. No child wants a needle. Even for blood work. I mean, there's other reasons.
I'm grown up and I still.
Yeah.
I literally like go panic when the needle comes out.
Yeah. I mean, it's tough. I mean, I still flinch a little bit. Maybe turn my head a little bit, but it's one of those things where I believe wholeheartedly in the role of vaccination in our children that I'm seeing, just I think more from the perspective of doing international medicine and seeing sort of what I've seen. So I do sort of encourage that and really encourage my children or my patients to be getting them. It's a hurdle, but it's something that I think is important for them.
Right. Well, you can give them a sticker, right?
Yeah, I have and I actually got stickers. Somebody made some stickers. I think some of the nursing team members made some stickers for us that I can give some of my personal stickers, or we have some, the Spider-Mans and all that stuff as well, for sure.
Yeah,
no candy.
Yeah, no candy. Or fruit and vegetable stickers. I'm wondering, because you probably see kids I'm guessing from 0 to 18. Would that be correct?
21. I see them 20. Yeah, they're young adults, but I see them 21. But yes, from 0 to 21. Majority of them are for sure, majority probably 0 to 11, 0 to 12. Teenagers, I see a lot of teens, but we see a lot more of the younger kids.
Because I'm just wondering, I'm trying to remember when I was little, how I would have been enrolled into eating healthy. And I'm wondering if the animal compassion piece is a good thing to promote to children. Not necessarily to have them see a movie like Earthlings, but I think, I think about that saying from Harvey Diamond, who wrote, I think it was called I forget, Fit for Life or something, where he said, take a baby and put him in a playpen with a bunny and a carrot. And if he eats the bunny and plays with the carrot, I'll buy you a car. I think a lot of times, not that we want to torture children, but children don't know where their meat comes from.
Yeah, I think that's a true statement. I think that they don't know where their meat come from. They don't know where their vegetables come from. They don't know. I mean, it's packaged in people don't know where food comes from at all anymore. But I think it's something that we see quite often. I think it's interesting. I mean, it comes down to the weight of something like that in one's perspective and culture. If one is struggling to access food, then the burden of the experience of the animal may not have as much weight as if someone has sort of more of the privilege and experience and freedom and liberation to then be able to choose whatever they want to eat. And then some of those other things come up more. It's the same with, things like recycling and all these things. Like the idea of long-term gratification is sometimes it's harder to achieve and feel when you're experiencing significant stress. Typically, you're seeing more sort of that short-term. Feed, eat, sleep, whatever is more in the short term. So I do think it's a strategy that works with a lot of people. One of my students was telling me about their journey being plant-based. So they talked about as a child. I was like, oh, tell me about your experience. She said as a child, she saw she was actually in Ethiopia and she saw a child or I think a lamb being slaughtered. And she said ever since then, she was like, I'm not eating meat anymore. And she stuck with it. And so for the rest of her life, she did that. And I think it means a lot to some children. Some other children, it is what it is. But yeah, but that's graphic too. That's traumatizing for them to.
No, I'm not suggesting like to.
Okay.
No, I'm not at all, because I just remember having the plant-based dietitian Brenda Davis on, and she was saying when her son went to a birthday party at McDonald's, he didn't even understand that the hamburgers were made out of cows, and he started crying when he found that out. So I guess it's going to depend on the child. I'm not saying to torture them, but I'm just curious, because are the children that come to you just because you're a pediatrician, or are they looking for more wellness in the lifestyle area, or they just don't know what they're getting until they see you?
I think it's probably a little bit of both. I think people are definitely referred to me. I think the challenge for me is I'm only there a few days a week, so I have a panel of patients that I've grown to know and love over the years, and it's hard to kind of fit more patients in there. So it is tough, but I definitely get the referrals in for people who are trying to especially understand the approach to lifestyle medicine in their own health for their own family. And so I get a lot of those referrals into my clinic for sure. I think, but then again, I also get patients who, in a community practice, who are just kind of coming in here going through, I need my school forms, I need, whatever it is. And then you get a little bit more with me, right? Maybe you get a little bit extra guidance around some of these things and the importance of sleep and stress reduction and eating and some of these things that some of my colleagues do, and some of my colleagues may not do as much as well. So it's, preference.
Are you seeing a lot of this addiction in your patients, even young? I mean, I see kids like, I'm not kidding, 2 years old with an iPhone. I was like 60 when I got one.
Yeah, it's very addicting. The screens are very addicting. They're designed to be that way. You can imagine with COVID, it's probably increased the screen addiction logarithmically, right? Exponentially. For sure. And one of the questions I typically ask is how much screen time the children are getting. It's just been really hard, right? Like I think coming from the perspective of like parents still trying to maintain their jobs, kids have had to stay at home. Sometimes they're there's just a lot of a very palpable stress in the home. So it's one of the ways that it can sort of take people's minds off of, what's going on right now. So I see a lot of it. I see a lot of games, maybe some games that are probably not for their age, because it seems like the age range is just kind of blurred now. But I'm seeing a lot of video games and TV watching and screens, tablets, and all those things. There's grace I extend, recognizing that it's hard, but at the same time, trying to encourage them that it's not the greatest thing for brain development. It's not the greatest thing for, helping with focus and concentration and anxiety and those kind of things, especially when you talk about the social medias and those kind of things as well, which that's a tough topic, so I'll leave that alone. But sort of you see this baseline anxiety in the background that a lot of my patients are having. This palpable stress is based on anxiety that, a lot of that sort of the new age consumerism and all these things kind of, it really makes it tough to separate from.
Yeah. A few years ago, I remember whoever the Surgeon General was at the time said, this is going to be the first generation of children that don't outlive their parents. Do you agree with that? How do you feel about that?
Ooh, that, I remember David used to say that a lot years ago. And was it the pediatrician, Dr. Coop? I forgot his name.
Maybe
but yeah,
Coop, possibly.
I think it was. And I think that there's been some sort of updates in that language. I think that in general, going down the path we're going down, we're not seeing an improvement in health culturally. We're seeing changes in behaviors, right? We're seeing reduction in sugary drink intake. We're seeing some of these things, but it's not necessarily resulting in improved health. In one of the most, modern industrialized countries in the world, we should expect to see improvements in mortality risk and morbidity risk, especially in infants and children and pregnant mothers and all these things, even when it comes to children as they grow. But we're seeing diabetes at a younger age. We're seeing hypertension at a younger age. We're seeing all these things at a younger age. So it does make sense, but medicine is medicine. So we're coming out with more and more medicines, and it may prolong health even longer with some of these things that we're seeing. So I don't know. You can argue both ways. I do think that you're going to see a far higher amount of diet-related chronic diseases much earlier on than we've seen in years past. Whether that results in immediate death or not, it's something that we are seeing now and we'll continue to see for sure, unless there's a significant change that's not just done through one-on-one, but requires systematic changes as well.
And the answer is vegetables, early and often. And, you know, I think about that because I tell people to start your day with them for breakfast. I can't get that out of my mind. I'm going to use it if you don't mind. I love that phrase you taught me today.
It's not, yeah, it's not mine, but you can.
I'll give you credit. Have you been able to, since you're such a stand for healthy eating and healthy living, have you been able to influence any of your coworkers or medical colleagues or even family members?
Yeah, so I don't walk around like just, you know,
like me. That's why you
well, it just, I mean, I am an academic, so I you know, I try to make sure that, you know, I'm respecting everyone and all those kind of things, of course, which you do as well. I'm not saying you don't respect, but the thing that I do is I live it out, right? Like, so when people see what I'm eating, they're like, "Oh, what is that? That smells so good. Who's eating that? Is that Kofi again?" Yeah, it's Kofi eating it. So they come over and look at the okra, they look at the beans, they look at the rice, they look at the lentils. They see what I'm eating, the plantains, these foods that they're loving. They're full of flavor. It doesn't have to be foods that they may not want to eat, which, you know, some people, the association of plant-based is just salad, and salad may be great for some people. Some people don't want to just have salad. They want to have other things. And it's like, yeah, you can eat a variety of things and really enjoy and reap the benefits. And after you eat, you don't have to fall asleep. You don't have to fall asleep after you eat. And it's one of the greatest things. So I have seen, yes, time and time again, I've seen my colleagues, I've seen my medical students, I've seen, of course, my patients, friends, definitely adopt this by watching me and my family consume a plant-based diet for sure, and seeing the benefits of it, seeing our health, seeing how we feel, seeing how much energy we have. You might be able to see I have a lot of energy, so I'm trying to.
You look amazing, and people are saying we need more Dr. Essels in this world. What do you eat? I love to know because you love to cook. So kind of run us through a day of like how you eat and how much you exercise, so we can be inspired.
Yeah, so I played sports all my life, well, basketball, and I ended up walking on the basketball team in college, and so I always that was a part of my lifestyle. So exercise, I work with a guy named Dr. Bill Dietz, and he always likes to use the term physical activity instead of exercise, right? Because exercise is so like rigid. And David says that a lot as well, right? It's so rigid. You have to think about physical activity, and so I'm very active with what I do. We have you know, weight equipment, and I do the weight equipment. I walk. I have fun with my kids. We go to the playground. I'm just very active. Do I play basketball as much as I used to? No. And have I been to the gym as much as I used to now because of COVID? No. So I miss out on that, and I want to do more of that. But otherwise, I'm really, really active otherwise. In terms of food, a lot of rich, flavorful food. So again, I said rice about 15 times a day. So I do rice. With my rice, I like to decrease the glycemic load. So I always add beans or lentils or something like that I cook it in, sometimes mixing with quinoa as well. A lot of the traditional dishes we do are okra-based stew, spinach-based stew, so tomatoes, onions, and mixing a lot of the okra or beans, black beans, chickpeas. I like to do curries. A lot of my friends are of Indian descent, so they've taught me a lot of what they've done and how they stack and layer flavors. And so I love to make Indian foods. We love to eat Indian foods. I love plantains. We always have plantains in our home, which we can bake. We do in the air fryer. We can boil. There's all kinds of ways of doing plantains, not just on the pan, fried, right? Like there's all sorts of ways of doing this. What else? There's a food called jollof in West African culture that is basically tomato-based stew mixed with rice, and I'm trying to compare it to another food of another culture, but basically just a rice dish that you can add other vegetables to. Whatever I'm eating, I always look at it as I can add more vegetables to whatever I'm eating. Like there's no limitation. Sometimes my mom will say, well, we don't eat that okra with this, with those with mushrooms. I'm like, well, it doesn't matter to me. Like it's more vegetables, more of a way to incorporate more of that flavor and that nutrition into my lifestyle. I'll do green smoothies with ginger and kale and spinach and cayenne and so I do those. My family loves those as well. Yeah, so those are some of the great foods that we eat and love. A ton of greens. I like fire under my food a little bit. So unfortunately, I'm not you might have seen my bias. I'm not the biggest fan of just straight salad. You can put some fire in it, mix it with some quinoa or something like that. That's fine. But I just don't want to eat a straight salad. It's just not as appetizing to me personally.
Do you like spicy food?
Oh my gosh. Oh, how did I leave that out? We use habaneros.
Oh, you're going to love the vinegar that you get for being on the show because they have a flavor blazing habanero.
Ooh, infused with habaneros. I'm gonna love it. I'm gonna love it. So yes, I cook with habaneros and chili peppers and cayenne pepper. I will say, if my wife is watching, she's not able to tolerate that level. So I've had to kind of reduce the intensity of my spice over the years. And the kids, they haven't been able to tolerate that yet, but I'm hoping as they get older, they'll be able to tolerate more of that. So, but yeah, I love spice for sure. I'll use different jerk seasonings as well with my beans. I don't really believe that, the food has to have a specific time of day. So you might find me in the morning eating, some beans and rice or different things like that I'm driving to work or taking in, or some okra in the morning. And that's just who I am, because I don't feel like I have to limit it based on what culture says this food is for. So
I agree. That's why I eat vegetables for breakfast. Do you ever do teff?
So I have done teff. Let me see. So injera is made out of teff, correct? Right. So I don't make teff or use teff in any kind of way, but I really enjoy Ethiopian food and the rich flavors of Ethiopian food. So I'll do injera, but I don't know of any other ways of doing that. Maybe that's going to come as I continue to expand my horizon in different plant-based foods. But yeah, I don't know of it in anything else other than injera.
I've only had it cooked once, and I tend to not be. I tend to eat the same thing every day. I'm so boring, but I had it once. It's a whole grain, and I'm sure very good for you. Like other whole grains. You are just so fun to talk to, very easy to talk to. I wish you were a grown-up doctor.
Yeah, nope. Oh, well, 18 to 21.
I've already
yeah. When I see those 18 to 20, I'm like, are you sure you want to be here? You're not ready to transition? But we have fun. We like they always want to hang on a little bit. You build these relationships with kids and families as they get older. They want to hang on a little bit longer. For sure. But yeah, no, not older than that for sure. Not in this season of my life for sure.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. It's just such a pleasure getting to know you. I'm sure I'd love to have you on again, because you're just very inspiring, and I love what you stand for, and I love the work that you're doing. So thank you so much for coming on the show.
It's my pleasure. Would love to.
Thank you. And thanks all of you for watching another episode of Chef AJ Live. Please come back tomorrow. The show will be at 2 p.m. and my guest is Dr. Doug Lisle. Take care, Dr. Essel.
Thank you. Thank you all. Bye.